Hello, everyone. Happy Sunday, and welcome to Restoring Our Roots podcast, the voice of the decriminalized nature movement. This podcast is a gathering space where we explore the wisdom of entheogenic plants and fungi, the beauty of natural healing, and the importance of reconnecting with the sacred earth. Twice a month, we'll hear from visionaries, healers, and advocates who are working with entheogenic plants and fungi, exploring realms of consciousness, and returning us to a balanced relationship with nature. We're happy to be about, I think, 7 episodes into season 3 now, around about. Is that right, Rachel? Somewhere around there. So it's been quite an amazing time. If you haven't checked it out yet, come find us on Spotify, YouTube Live, or any of the other platforms we might be on. My name is Larry Norris. I'm the co-founder of Decriminalized Nature and the national organizing director. I've had the privilege in the last 7 years as we've been going as an organization to help people all across the U.S. and the world to basically, change policy in their local jurisdiction to make sure people aren't getting arrested for entheogenic plants and fungi like mushrooms with psilocybin and psilocin, cacti with mescaline, plant combinations similar to ayahuasca that have DMT, and plants that have ibogaine in them. So if you are interested in changing policy in your local area, please connect with us and connect with the movement. Go to decriminalizenature.org and contact us that way, or contact us at info@decriminalizenature.org. Also want to give a big shout out to Rachel, who's always here and doing the good work. So thank you, Rachel, for doing all the behind the scene production and making sure that we have these episodes out on all the different podcast platforms, and your inspiration for making this happen in the first place. So I really appreciate your help there, Rachel.
Oh, yeah. This is
Also,
season six, episode six. No,
season
it's just season
six,
season three, episode
season three,
six.
season three, episode 6. So we're moving along, which is
Yeah,
pretty
there you go.
incredible. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, and if you are interested in this, we're going to be having this one live, as I said, and then coming in the next couple of weeks, we'll be putting this on Spotify or other platforms such as Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, etc. If you'd like to make a donation to help support the amazing movement and show, you can now do so on the podcast platforms by clicking the donate buttons below. So help us out and keep us going. For live listeners, Rachel will also be gathering any questions or comments you have during the episode and the conversation. So go ahead and put those in the chat box. In the last 10 minutes, we'll be discussing those on the conversation as well. Really excited to have our guest today. Our guest is Hans Wegoldt, who reached out to us to share his story of healing and transformation through his ayahuasca experiences, and how that led him to his interest in breathwork. So I've had a few breathwork sessions myself, but very sort of beginner. So I'm very curious to hear a little bit more about breathwork and the intersection with ayahuasca. That was also kind of how I came across it. So I'm very curious to hear what you have to say about it today. So thank you very much for being here. How you doing today, Hans?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me. Really feel honored to be on your show, and I really appreciate you and Decriminalize Nature for everything you do, and of course, Rachel, for you hosting
Right
this
on.
today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Hans. Yeah, maybe we could start off with a little background bio. Tell us a little about who you are and how you got to this area, and anything else you'd like the audience to know.
Yes, sure. Currently, I'm a breathwork facilitator and I have a deep passion for plant medicine. I was stuck in a management position in our family business for 15 years, where I developed depression, anxiety, and eventually an 8-year opiate addiction.
Mm.
And nothing that I really tried helped until I traveled to Peru and had the opportunity to experience ayahuasca for the first time, which really changed the way I look at reality, consciousness, and myself. And it sent me on a long journey of exploring my consciousness and eventually led me to breathwork, which I facilitate now to help other people who experience similar struggles in life that I did.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I imagine um, for someone that's coming through, it sounds like you're more in the business world, and then have that first. Was this is your first psychedelic experience altogether, or entheogenic experience, the ayahuasca, or had you had some experiences before then?
I had a few mushroom trips as a teenager in high school, but I did not know anything about healing properties of plant medicine. At that time, when I was traveling to Peru, I actually just wanted to trip because I was still addicted to opiates. And I heard, oh, about this psychedelic substance in the jungle. I didn't know anything about healing properties of plant medicine, but what I experienced in Peru was anything else than tripping, but it was a deeply healing experience that connected me with something inside that I didn't know I had and filled me with so much love for life.
Hmm. Yeah, it seems like there's such an interesting tie-in there with this with this new experience, this like people, maybe you could, I'm trying to sort of figure out how do we define the difference between, well, some people will say, oh, ayahuasca is tripping, which I think maybe a lot of people think that the first time. And then what you're saying, which I agree with, is like, it's much deeper than that. It's an exploration of consciousness. It's an exploration of the nature of reality. How would you sort of distinguish those two areas for people? You know, the sort of more sacred experience that you maybe have when you have the ayahuasca experience, and then the tripping mindset, which kind of came in thinking that it would be like, what were the differences there?
I think what was really unique about my very first experience, I came in with the expectation to trip, to have this deep hallucination, and I started drinking the medicine, and absolutely nothing happened for me.
Mm,
Everybody around me started doing something, and I was just stuck in my mind. And then we got a second serving. I drank the second serving, says, okay, this one's going to do it. And nothing happened.
mm,
Then we drank a third serving and nothing happened. And that brought out so much anger and frustration and disappointment in me. And eventually I said, I'm not going to lay here anymore, frustrated, angry, and upset and waste my time. I just going to go to sleep. I turned around, closed my eyes, lay down, and 2 minutes later, I started, my whole consciousness shifted.
mm,
And there was no hallucination or as what I had expected. My body was just suddenly filled with this gratitude and love for life and beauty. And I remember I was laying on the ground, shaking for 2 hours and crying tears of pure joy. And it was nothing like I had expected.
mm. Oh yeah, definitely. I imagine there's also this element of like as soon as you relax, that's when things have the opportunity to come forward. And when you're like constantly seeking for the experience, it's almost like you're running in front of it without it like letting to catch up to you. But what was that sense when you started to like emerge into this new space, the shift of consciousness? Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
And yes, I think you point, like you said, if you chase that experience, you might not get it. And as soon as I was able to let go and relax, something changed. And I think it taught me a lot about expectations and surrendering and accepting what is.
Mhm. Yeah, I imagine that's a big part they hear about, and I know that there's some people out there that sometimes will have a little bit of hesitation around the surrendering process, either because they're trying to heal trauma, and trauma, the surrender process around trauma made it very difficult. I imagine you deal with this in breathwork as well. The surrender process can be sometimes tough for people to sort of sink into, so to speak. So you surrendered, you allowed this opportunity to open up, and then you sort of had this. Was it like a dreamlike state, or was it just totally somatic, emotional states, or what was that sensation like?
It's very hard to describe, as you can
Sure.
imagine, or anyone imagine who has worked with plant medicine. There was just an enhanced mental clarity and an inner silence that I had not experienced, and enhanced awareness of sound, and physically just like my whole body was just filled with a layer of gold inside.
Mhm. Yeah, that's amazing how these plants that come out of the ground can have this experience. Did you have any sense of, you said you had a different sense of consciousness and nature of reality. What was the shift for you as you come back from the experience?
When I came back from the experience, I just realized I had this inner emptiness that I had attempted to fill for years with substances, with material things, with possessions. And the more I tried to fill that void, the bigger that it grew. And after the experience, it felt like the void was gone, like I connected with something inside of me that I had ignored or forgotten. And there was just this pure joy of being in the present moment. And that lasted for several days or weeks, that I was just feeling fine with whatever that is, whatever. I just started accepting life instead of resisting. It's very, very difficult to describe.
Mm. And then so you had the experience, and then from there you're saying to yourself, I'm not interested in filling this void with substances anymore. And then how did that sort of work in, or how did the integration process go in terms of your healing around opioids?
I just developed this deep curiosity of life and consciousness. And I think one part of opioids was boredom, that I just didn't know what to do with myself. And suddenly I developed this curiosity and I started reading everything I could about psychedelics, about consciousness, about spirituality. I started working with other plant medicine in a more intentional way. And I think it gave me more sense, more purpose in my life to find out more about myself and what is driving me, what's causing my suffering, and just the deep curiosity of life itself and of what consciousness is.
Mhm. And then so you sort of started to open up a little bit more. You said you also were working a little bit more with other plant medicines. What other plant medicines you find were helpful for you in that follow-up process? And we're using them as like integration, or is it more for more exploration?
It was a combination of both. It was exploration and integration because I was trying to see what I was trying to learn more about what these plants can do and exploring deeper parts of myself.
Hmm. And is there anything that you were surprised by as you sort of went into the other types of medicines in more of an intentional way?
I think what surprised me the most when I experienced a complete outer body experience, when I lost complete awareness of my body and the physical world, and this 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 role I was playing in the world. There was no no awareness of Hans, no awareness of Hans. There was just pure bliss and just being awareness.
Yeah, that's always an interesting part of these experiences, especially when we're talking about intention setting and other things like that, is how you can be in an experience where you completely lose a sense of yourself. And even the word Hans doesn't mean anything, or Larry doesn't mean anything. It's just I'm even human. What is a human? What is Larry? What is Hans? I'm guessing that was kind of what the feel was like for you. And yet somehow we still have to remember what our intention is, right? And so there's this interesting thing when we totally become so um, distant from our sort of body self or our thinking or our mind process of like this reality, and we're in this other sort of transcendent state of transcending space and time almost, if you will, being one of everything, that you forget the little nuances. How did you sort of deal with that? You lose track of who Hans is, but you know you're still awareness somewhere out there. What was that sensation like for you?
It was it wasn't like I was trying to, I don't know, it was just like a movie being played in in front of my eyes. There's no, I mean, I couldn't have gotten up if I wanted to because there was no awareness that I even had a body. There was just this being, and there was no mind to think about what does this mean, because it was just there was no, yes, my mind did not play any role in that process. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. And where do you feel like you what did you go like, this is always an interesting question, did you go somewhere? Was it deeper in your mind? What's your sense of that? Is there realities that are outside of us? Do we go to different realms? What is this more real? I don't know if you've ever experienced a more real than real state. Like how do you sort of interpret all that in terms of mind and consciousness?
It felt very familiar, the place, but it's very hard for me to answer your question, to be
Sure.
honest. It felt like my, I don't know. It just felt like it's more authentic, and everything I've been telling myself are just stories, and all my worries are really non-existent because they're so irrelevant towards the greater truth of who I am, if that makes any sense.
Hmm. And then the greater truth of who you are is sort of this wordless, ineffable experience of self. That's maybe the big S self versus the little s self. And you kind of went and experienced that. Is that kind of what I'm hearing from you there?
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
And that's,
okay, great.
yeah.
And then through those explorations, you kind of can't, how did you then come across breath work, or what was your lead up into that as you're sort of exploring these other realms of consciousness? Breath work oftentimes doesn't necessarily make its way easily into the psychedelic conversation, although there are a lot of overlapping sort of communities that sort of speak to both of those. Like, how did you go to breath work from there?
As a result of my experience in Peru and the work I did afterwards with psychedelics, I started donating money to MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. And as a thank you, they sent me a book. And the book I received was The Ultimate Journey from Stanislaw Grof,
Hmm.
where he talks about psychedelics, about spirituality, about religion. And in one chapter, he mentioned holotropic breathwork and described that you can have similar states like with plant medicine just through changing your breathing rhythm intentionally and listen to specific soundtracks. And when I read that, I wanted to experience breathwork because of my curiosity and to find out more about myself and consciousness. And it took me about a year and a half or two before I found a place where I could practice breathwork. And my first breathwork session, I would say, has been the most transformative ones of all. I remember I was breathing for about 2 or 3 minutes, and the last thought I have, I cannot keep up this breathing.
Hmm.
And after that, there was no more thought for 1 hour. I became aware that my body kept the breathing rhythm up without me trying to do it, without me trying to force it, without me putting any effort in. I was just experiencing this breath, and in this state, there was just inner peace, silence, beauty, and bliss. And it definitely had a transformative power as my ayahuasca experience.
Yeah, when I first time I had did breath work myself, it was the same sort of thing with this like I was also doing it around the same time as I was having some ayahuasca experiences. So I was saying to myself, breath work, it's just there. How could this possibly be, you know, as powerful, not as powerful, but in the same league as an ayahuasca experience or some of these other psychedelic experiences? And the person I was doing it with was like, well, just do it until you're surprised. I was like, okay, I can probably do that, right? So same thing, you get into this breathing routine, and then at some point in time, just like you're saying, there was this like layers of the onion, right? Which was like, I can't keep this up, I'm bored, I think I'm hungry, do I have to go pee? Who's that other person in the room making this noise? But like layers and layers and layers of resistance, right? As you get closer and closer down to that sense of a sort of separation, if you will, or that sort of the I don't know, trance state, if you want to call it. And then you get there, and it was very much surprising. Once you get there, is like, I think it was the same thing, like an hour and a half or 2 hours of just like this dream-like state where visions were happening, while also like, not really being present. It was very, very unique experience. Yes, to answer the question of the woman who was facilitating, I definitely was surprised by it because I didn't expect it to be kind of like that. Now, while this is happening, do you understand kind of the mechanism of why this happens? I know that there's a lot of oxygen coming in. Could you maybe also demonstrate for anyone that isn't familiar with breath work, kind of like what a rhythm of breath work looks like?
Yes, the breathing technique that we use during the breathwork that I do is first of all, it's belly breathing. You breathe into the belly and the diaphragm with the breath in. You want to have your belly rise and let the belly go in with the breath out, and you do a conscious connected breath or circular breathing without a pause between the in and the out breath. So you're consciously breathing. And the mechanism behind the way I understand it, because you inhale more oxygen than you usually do and exhale more CO2 than you usually do, the ratio of the gases in your body change, which turns the blood alkaline. And when the blood turns alkaline, as a result, there is less activity in the default mode network or the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that creates the image of the self or the ego mind. And when there's less activity, you have deeper access of your subconscious mind. And yes, that contributes to that experience.
Yeah, there's also, I think with this, I mean, I don't know if this happens normally. It definitely happened to me and a couple people in the room, but there's also this weird sort of physical response that happened, which was like, all that like breathing, like my lips kind of did that, and my fingers kind of did like that. What is that also like because there's more oxygen than your body is used to, or what's that sort of physical side of it? Because I know for some people that might be uncomfortable, but it is also part of the process there.
Yes, we call that tetany, and it's called tetany. And it happens to about 20 to 30% of the people, and usually just maybe for 2 or 3 times. And it can be uncomfortable or painful, especially most common it's in the hands, like they do this, or like you said this, but it can be uncomfortable if it goes in the elbow or in the jaws.
Hmm.
What I usually advise people just to stay curious to the process, see what emotions or fear or thoughts come up, and be curious about that. If you slow down the breath, it usually releases within a very few seconds. When I experienced it for the first time, for me, it didn't feel painful at all. I remembered my hands were just clawing up, but it felt like an energy was going through both of my arms and then through my body and out of my feet. And that was a very clear, very, very clearing energy.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, uncomfortable in the sense that, if you're not used to it happening, you're wondering what's going on here, right? Especially for your first time, like, whoa, what's this going on, right? And then I know also there's another thing that when we were doing it, and maybe this is part of the practice you're working on as well, where you'll have like somebody sit with you, and then I guess you breathe so much that at some point in time you don't have to breathe anymore, and then somebody has to kind of remind you to keep breathing. I don't know if that is something that you come up with, but I noticed a couple of times where it feels like you've done it so much that you're just kind of like you just silently kind of trance out a little bit, and then someone has to remind you, just like tap on you, just to not like go there too far. What is that process? What's that all about?
Yeah, so the breathwork that I facilitate and what I learned, we do not interfere with the breathers unless they ask for support, because you cannot really know what's going on inside of the person, even if they slow down their breath or if they start releasing noise or emotions. As a facilitator or an outsider, I have no idea what's going on in another person. And it could be that they're in a deep process. And when I interfere or touch them or say anything to them, that can pull them out of the experience, which is counterproductive. And in breathwork, we always say it's a part to reclaim their power and connect to your own power within. And if people do ask for support or help, yes, then we step in, even if they have some tensions. Some people start having tensions in parts of their body, and then it can be helpful to apply body work, which will help release emotions. But if I don't interfere unless there's a safety concern.
Mhm. Now I know that from a little bit of what I've read with Groff, there's a lot of connection between this and sort of a rebirthing process and its perinatal matrices. For folks that maybe aren't familiar out there, could you describe what those are and their connection and some of the rebirthing stuff that can happen, or the noises you say, some of the processes that people are going through breath work?
Yeah, I think one common theme, especially with people who have deep childhood trauma, it can happen that they re-experience their trauma doing breathwork session. However, re-experience it doing a breathwork session is not traumatizing because they start seeing their past from a different angle and getting a different perspective of what happened to them, which usually can help rechange the relationship with their trauma. And people also describe having experience while in the womb or doing birth. And when they come out of the breathwork session, I think that's what they then call rebirthing. It can be really just healing the parts that they weren't aware of.
Yeah, because that was definitely something that I'm sure there's a lot of controversy around that with Groff's work was that he believes that psychology actually starts before the birth process and the whole gestation process. Do you kind of are familiar with that background and kind of how that works for folks? Maybe explain that a little bit more.
Yes, I mean, I'm familiar with what he teaches, and I don't know if I'm qualified to explain it because I'm not a psychologist, but I think more and more people understand and accept that what happens while we're in the womb has a big influence of who we become when we grow up or as children.
Mhm. And I know Groff was also into a lot of, I think with Rick Tarnas was into this work around archetypal astrology. Are you tying that into your breathwork sessions at all as well, or what are your thoughts around that?
No, I don't tie that in to my breathwork session, and I'm not very familiar with that.
Okay, okay, great. Yeah, so when you set up someone for breath work, what's the process usually like for somebody that isn't familiar with it?
I think the most important thing is to be clear about your intentions and understand why you want to do it. And then I usually screen people because there's some contraindications, and if you have those, you shouldn't be doing breathwork. Breathwork is safe unless there's certain contraindications. So I think that's an important part, screening people and then become clear of their intentions and prepare. Breathwork, we say, it's three parts. It's similar to plant medicine. There's a lot of similarities actually. There's three parts. One is preparation, then is the breathwork experience itself, and then is integration.
What just before we go too far down that, because that sounds like a good conversation there. What are some of the contraindications that people should be aware of if they're at home and they're like, oh, I'd like to try this breath work out?
Yes, that's why we recommend not to do breathwork alone without a facilitator and someone who has experience. Contraindications are high blood pressure that's not regulated with medication, history of stroke, heart attack, or aneurysm, detached retina or glaucoma, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and PTSD is not a contraindication, but it's important to have a good support structure in your life because it can bring up trauma from the past that people may or may not be aware of. And then it's really important to have someone to support with integration.
And when somebody does have like a traumatic type of experience, what are the things that you try and do to help sort of support that? Is it just kind of let them go through? It sounds like you're trying to be sort of non-directive in that process, but somebody's going through a really big, difficult experience. How do you, as a facilitator, support that work?
Mostly by being present and making them feel safe and protected and make sure that, yes, that just being there for them. And if they need support afterwards, offer integration support or other resources if it's out of my area of expertise.
And how does the breathwork community sort of define and look at integration as a process? Is it kind of very much the same as the psychedelic entheogenic world, or are there different things that are unique to breathwork?
I don't think it's anything unique. I think it's very similar. And what I usually recommend is journaling on a regular basis and also making small adjustments in life, how you react, how you just any small daily changes in life you can implement that help you become more present, aware, and change the way you live. A little more loving, a little less reactive.
Do you find that people, because I've heard this happen for folks in the past, is that they're utilizing breath work as the integration for like the ayahuasca experience? Do you find that to be the case? Do you recommend that or not? What's your thought process on utilizing the two together as a preparation integration session?
I think it's a wonderful way to prepare for ayahuasca and to integrate. I facilitated several breathwork sessions before and after plant medicine ceremonies because it can get you into a similar state of mind and it can open open you up for the experience and also release any emotions which help you then transition into the plant medicine ceremony later, and then maybe a day afterwards doing another breathwork session is a wonderful way to integrate.
Yeah, it seems like there's an opportunity there sort of for reflection and also this sort of just this space of holding, which is naturally this liminal space, similar liminal spaces that we can kind of access points. So this is a question that comes up a lot in this conversation on this podcast is around integration and how do you work with integration and what type of techniques do you work with and and it's one that we don't really hear about too much is the integration of through breath work as a process for helping sort of land your experience and get an opportunity. Has there been anything that you've found that's something that I know you said earlier that you want to have make sure that somebody has a facilitator, but let's say somebody just had a big experience, they don't have access to a facilitator. Are there any sort of micro practices, like a micro dosing of breath work you can do, or something that somebody can do to kind of settle into this space and get a little bit more opportunity for integration through the breathwork process without a facilitator if they need to?
Yeah, there's several breathing techniques that you can use. A lot of people are probably familiar with box breathing, 4-7-8 breathing, very slow inhaling and longer exhaling. And what I tell all of my clients, the most powerful way they can do every time they notice their emotions are building up or they are getting distracted or it's difficult to focus, just taking a break and taking 3 conscious breaths into the belly, and it'll automatically helps you reshift focus. And at the beginning, when you're new to breath work, it may be difficult to remember to do that, but the more often you do it consciously, eventually it starts becoming an automatic behavior. Someone in your environment triggers you, and instead of automatically reacting, you stop, you take 2 or 3 deep breaths, and then you are able to respond from a place of presence instead of reacting to experiences from the past.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting comment because I can't tell you how many times I've had an ayahuasca experience or other psychedelic experiences with like the big insight that I get is breathe. That's like the biggest, most profound thing that I have in the entire experience is just like breathe, and all these moments when you're having, emotional sort of like, pressure or you're feeling like really out of it or whatever, I'll just to like take that moment to breathe. And it's something that we shouldn't have to learn over and over again, but somehow every experience I'm in, I'm back into this like just breathe. And it's such an interesting insight. And then you're sort of tapping right into that with the breath work there.
Yeah, I think that's also breath. The breath alone is a very powerful way to use during psychedelic experiences. When you start experiencing something challenging, just remind yourself to go back to the breath. And I had one experience. I remember I had 2 or 3 very good planned ceremonies, and then I did one, and I realized I was starting to go into a place where I did not want to go.
Mm.
And at that moment, I just sat up straight in a meditative space and started taking deep breaths. And when I write about it, I say the breath at that time took me from standing at the abyss of hell to like a highest states of heaven. Like within 3 breaths, I was suddenly the whole experience shifted from being terrifying to just absolutely beautiful state and inner peace and silence.
Mm. now, probably this isn't recommended for everyone, but given you have a lot of experience, it sounds like, have you ever compared or sort of done both at the same time? Have you ever been in a psychedelic experience and decided you're also going to do some breath work, or is that something you kind of keep as separate sort of entities?
I've experienced that with it, but I've not done a full breathwork session during a
Okay.
psychedelic ceremony. But I've used similar breathing, just circular, slow, conscious breathing, but not as intense as I would do in a breathwork session alone.
Is that something that people do or explore, or is that kind of not really something that people talk about too much, at least in the community that you're working with?
There are some people who microdose or even more before breathwork session. When I facilitate a breathwork, I always ask people not to do that because I do have a passion for plant medicine, but I also believe that breathwork is a powerful way to teach you to rely on everything you already have inside without needing any substances.
Hmm. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it seems like it's good to learn the one and utilize it as an adjunct to the other, but maybe, outside of an experiment, that would be the one thing just to see like, okay, what is this really like? But, like it seems like there's a space for each of those to be sort of independent on their own and then work together in unison versus working, both at the same time. You live in North Carolina now, and I imagine that is, maybe I'm wrong here, but outside of a few pockets here and there, North Carolina is more of a conservative type space. How is breathwork received in these areas? And then also in the same sort of conversation, how are psychedelics and entheogens being viewed in North Carolina right now?
Yes, it's a very much more conservative state than others, but to my surprise, there's a really good resonance for breathwork, and I've made some good, I've met some really interesting people just through offering breathwork. And there are some areas there where breathwork and psychedelics are more common than in other areas of North Carolina. And I do think there's a growing awareness of how powerful it is.
Mhm. And I know that we have a couple of teams. I know Asheville and a couple other places out there in North Carolina that have sort of sparked up and been interested in trying to do some work there. But I think the state law there is makes it made it kind of difficult for cities to actually move things forward. I know you also mentioned before we were on the call today that you'd be heading to Germany again soon. What is maybe share with the audience like what your thoughts are on Germany and its process in terms of passing any kind of legislation that looks positive for the psychedelic or entheogenic field.
Yes, I believe America is much more progressive in legalizing plant medicine and making these powerful tools available than Germany. I'm not too familiar about their policies other than they legalized psilocybin for depression, treatment-resistant depression. However, only in the form of synthetic psilocybin by one pharmaceutical company. I would say it's a start, but there's still a lot of work to do in that area.
And is there, I'm always curious about this as well. Obviously, mushrooms are pretty ubiquitous across the planet. What is there a long-standing history of mushroom use in Germany that, I mean, you hear stories and fables and these types of things, but do you know kind of some of the legends and lore of ancient Germany and was there mushroom use that you were familiar with back then?
Historically, I'm not too familiar with, but I know there's a lot of stories about witches and the creams and stuff they put on their body, and they included deadly nightshade and mushrooms, but that's the only extent I know.
Yeah, I think there's so much history that's kind of been lost over the many years around all these ancient practices. My family's from Finland, and the same sort of thing. There's like you hear whispers of mushroom or other different types of sort of magical practices or ancient nature-based practices back then, but those got sort of washed away a long time ago with the religions coming in and sort of trying to get rid of all the pagan or nature-based spiritual constructs out there. So yeah, I'm always curious how that sort of works in these different places. You hear about this in Ireland and Scotland and UK as well. These different mushrooms that pop up, liberty caps everywhere that everyone knows about but nobody talks about. Right, so I was curious, kind of in Germany, what that sort of history is and maybe the culture around that. If they're sort of embedded deeply into the country there. Um, so I guess I always ask this question to all the different guests that are here because I think it's interesting to kind of hear the different versions of what people think about it. But the question that we're going to ask is, when you hear the words decriminalize nature, what does that mean to you? How do you sort of think about that? What is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear those words?
The first thing that come to mind, no one has the right to criminalize nature
Hmm.
because all plants were given to us with a specific purpose. And in my opinion, it's absolutely ridiculous to punish someone for growing a plant or ingesting the plant, especially with if they do it intention for spiritual or emotional healing.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and how did you come across finding out about decrim nature yourself out there in North Carolina?
I think it was just my passion that I developed through my experience in Peru and that I started reading about psychedelics and research, and either through a book I read or through the internet. I don't remember. It's been a while back, but
Yeah.
I deeply resonated with your work and your mission and everything you do.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that it's making it out to all different areas and people are talking about this and the movement's building and there's so many people out there, cities all across the U.S. right now that are working on this. It's pretty impressive, and especially with the ebb and flow, you have this sort of uncertainty on the federal level. Is this going to be more conservative or less conservative? Is it going to be people more punitive around this or not? Is it going to go into the pharmaceutical realm or not? And yet people are still out there teaching each other how to grow mushrooms, getting out there to like make policy happen on the city level and actually taking the matter into their own hands instead of waiting for lobbyists to do it. So that's really a pleasure to hear that the voice is getting out there and that people are hearing about it and sharing with each other and learning how to heal together and coming up with new practices like breathwork, like you're doing, to help to sort of bring people forward and these, I think, familiarity with altered states. I think that's a big thing about some of the breath work. It's a space for people who are uncertain around substances to explore some of these liminal spaces that isn't just a dream, but it's still something that can connect someone deeply with these other states of mind. So thank you for doing that work.
Yeah,
So
and
I have, go ahead, sorry.
one thing that I always mention when I talk about psychedelics and ayahuasca, that although ayahuasca is a Schedule One substance in the United States, it's always also protected under the Religious Freedom Act. And I don't think the vast majority of people are aware of that. So I think that's always important to point that out. And yes, as you mentioned, with breathwork, you can experience similar states of expanded consciousness and can start healing without having to ingest anything or putting yourself in a position where you might be judged or criticized by others.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, in terms of the ayahuasca and the religious, use, we have about five churches, I think, or four or five churches now, I think, that have been passed, but not all churches. Like Soul Quest, a couple other ones got turned down. So everyone out there, still be careful if you're working with ayahuasca. Santo Daime is okay. The UDV is okay. The Church of the Condor and the Eagle is okay. And I think the Church of Gaia out of Tacoma, Washington, just got an exemption from the DEA recently. So within those contexts, which of course sets precedence for everyone else to be able to do it as well, but I know that there's only, I think, maybe even just the UDV one through the Supreme Court, which is sort of the highest level, which is important. But definitely there's still a little bit of work to do out there regarding ayahuasca. But definitely be safe if you can. But really some amazing progress that's happening out there. I know we have about 7 or 8 minutes left here. I just want to throw it to Rachel, who has one question and maybe some comments. And thank you very much, Hans, for an enlightening conversation so far.
Oh, yes. I had a few comments of people saying it's an interesting conversation. I think also from a perspective from martial arts or anyone who's doing anything kind of physical, how important breath is for you to do any of that and the integration of how you can change your state. with something so simple as breath. So, my question for you, Hans, is this. I really loved how you described your first experience of breaking through, as in, like, oh, nothing's happening. And then it's almost like just like a dream. You like appear, like, oh, and now I'm in a new world. Um, are you someone who, before or after, or are you a big dreamer? Are you someone who dreams a lot before or after that state? Is that something that's just a curiosity from me?
Yes, I've always dreamt, but I feel my dreams have become much deeper and I memorize more of my dreams and they seem to have more meaning.
I love that. Did you have, would you say your dreams, I guess, got more vivid and more meaningful after that experience?
Yes, I think through the longer I've been doing breathwork and meditating, I dream much more than before and much more vivid.
I love
And
that. Yeah,
yes,
I'm a big dreamer, so I love that because it seems like the way you describe that is, I know it's very difficult to describe, but you did, I think, a very good job of explaining something that's quite ineffable. And my follow-up question to that is that I find this conversation is very synchronistic because yesterday I was doing a little session of three healing through your voice because I've been trying to get back my singing voice and just healing from vocal trauma, right? Being able to like take space with your vocal cords and be able to sing. And when I was doing the tonal exercise, out of nowhere, I just started crying because I started remembering a lot of my friends and we used to sing and harmonize together. And so, I don't know, like I wasn't expecting that to happen. And so when you were talking about how it's good to have a facilitator or guide there for when you're exploring worlds like memory or dreams, that sometimes things come up that you forgot and then maybe you're not prepared for the influx of emotion that comes through, and it's wonderful that you're in a position to be aware to help with that. So it's good that you brought that up because I think people, as we're trying to explore the inner world, just be aware that it's good to have friends, guides, people that you can trust around. So that was just a comment. That's it.
yes, thank you so much for your comment. And it is quite common for people to release tears and emotions during breathwork session as a wonderful way to help you
Release.
release stuck emotions that were suppressed or ignored, avoided for a bigger part of your life. And when you do, breathwork is a safe space to release these emotions without releasing them on people in our environment through anger or
Yeah.
anything like
Anything
that.
bad. And if each of us just gets to do that a little bit more, take a breath before we react, I think the whole world would just be a better place. So back to you,
Yes.
Larry.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah, and that's such an interesting conversation link there too around this interaction or this sort of relationship between dream states and breathwork states and psychedelic states, and something that we've been working on unpacking a little bit here and there through guests over the many seasons about like how do they see how do those interactions happen, and you sort of put another layer on that, Hans, for us, which is like this breathwork state, this liminal state with breathwork, and how do those all interconnect with just the breathing. So thank you for that. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on today that you'd like to cover or talk about?
I could go on for another hour talking about breathwork. I think just like the work with plant medicine, integration is a very important part. A lot of people are aware of it, but also with plant medicine, a lot of people forget about it. And they come to this experience, either plant ceremonies or breathwork, with this experience is going to change my life. And then they have the most transformative experience. But then they forgot integration, and within a few days or weeks, they fall back into the same patterns. And then they said, oh, I need another session. I need another breathwork session, plant matter session. And again, they just go into the experience, hoping that it'll transform their life, but they don't realize it's a tool. But then what we do in the following days and weeks on a daily basis is really where we create lasting changes.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so important that to follow through on the homework assignments, take accountability for the things afterwards, so you can actually not have to revisit it. Because that's oftentimes what happens, at least from my own experiences. If I don't integrate it, I spend the whole next journey. revisiting those lessons that I was supposed to integrate in the previous one. So, taking those steps to make sure that you're doing the work makes it so that your next experience kind of takes you a
Oh
little
my
bit further.
gosh, Larry, saying like homework assignments. I literally had like a dream about like Mother Nature being like, okay, you have these assignments to do by the time equinox hits. So you're off. So
Okay.
so Mother Nature's work homework
Yeah,
for you.
smart. Well, I mean, you gotta go through the process, right? So yeah, thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Hans. Yeah, and if there's any way for people to want to contact you or to get a hold of you, I know you're going to give Rachel some information to put on the blurb here, but any other way for someone to reach out to you and find out what's going on in terms of breath work or maybe connecting with you with either North Carolina or Germany.
Yeah, the best way is through Facebook as Hans Andreas Weygoldt, or and I have a website. My breathwork business is called Pneumorphosis at pneumorphosis.com, or LinkedIn. Those are the best ways, but I'm most active on Facebook at this moment.
Great, wonderful, and new morphosis, like metamorphosis, but with new in the front. Is that right?
Like pneuma is the Greek word
Pneuma.
for
Okay.
breath or spirit, and morphosis, the transformation. Yes,
Gotcha.
so pneumorphosis.
Pneumomorphosis. Okay, gotcha. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. And please, anyone reach out to Hans, especially if you're interested in more information about breath work or doing a session at all. Really a wonderful conversation today, Hans. Thank you for being here, sharing a little bit with me. I only have a very, sort of superficial layer of understanding around the breath work, but I think you helped help me understand a little bit more about it and hopefully for the audience as well. So thank you for being here. As a reminder, everybody, we're going live every 2 weeks, so you'll find our shows, here live on the YouTube channel, or also, like I said, on Rumble, or excuse me, Rumble, Odyssey, and YouTube Live. And then about a week or two from now, you'll find this episode on Spotify, Apple, and other podcast platforms. Reminder: our next show will be March 22nd. We're going to have Rebecca Wilkinson on, who is the co-founder of the Psychedelic Art Therapy Network, and she's working on the intersection of creativity, art, and psychedelics. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel to keep updated on upcoming shows and check out the shows we've had in the past. It's been quite a little journey here. Thank you, Rachel, for continuing on with us. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. Thank you, Hans. Thank you, Rachel, for the conversation. And until next time, tune in.